The voicemail lasted 11 seconds. That was all it took to end 14 years. Mrs. Hargrove, this is the board. We're calling a vote, emergency session, 7 a.m. tomorrow. A pause. Then, don't bother preparing remarks. Serena Hargrove set her phone face down on the kitchen counter and stood very still. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Tribeca apartment, Manhattan was doing what it always did, glittering, indifferent, moving at a speed that had nothing to do with her. She had loved this city once for exactly that reason. Right now it felt like a verdict. She picked up the phone again, read the message again, put it back down. Then she walked to her closet, pulled out her best suit, the charcoal Armani she'd worn to the Meridian Capital acquisition closing, and hung it on the door. Old habit. Dress for the outcome you want, not the one you're afraid of. The thing was, she already knew the outcome, 14 years. That was how long she had been at Halcyon Financial Group. She had started as a senior analyst at 31, which was considered young then and would be considered miraculous now. She had run 3 departments, closed 11 major acquisitions, and been named CFO at 38. 2 years ago, the board had handed her the CEO title with a standing ovation and a bottle of Chateau Petrus. She hadn't drunk it. She'd put it in the cabinet above the refrigerator, where it still sat, waiting for something she couldn't yet name. The board voted 8-1 to remove her at 7:14 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. The charges, outlined in a 12-page document she was handed as she walked in the door, were a familiar kind of corporate theater: strategic misalignment, failure to communicate key risk assessments, breach of fiduciary duty with respect to the Caldwell acquisition. The Caldwell acquisition, of course. She had warned them. Twice, in writing, once in person. She had told them the numbers didn't hold, that the due diligence on Caldwell's offshore portfolio was incomplete, that they were buying a liability dressed in a suit. The board had overruled her. The deal had closed. 6 months later, 3 federal regulators were asking questions, 2 institutional investors had pulled out, and Halcyon's stock had dropped 31%. And somehow she was the one sitting in a conference room listening to them read charges. The one vote in her favor was from Gerald Foss, who was 72 years old, nearly deaf in one ear, and had known her since she was an analyst. He caught her eye across the table as the vote was announced. He looked like a man watching a fire he couldn't stop. She drove herself home. She didn't trust herself to say anything to anyone in that building. She parked in the garage, took the elevator up, walked into her apartment, and sat on the floor in the entryway without taking off her coat. She stayed there for a while. The legal and financial unraveling took 3 months. The Caldwell deal had been structured in a way that exposed her to personal liability, something her attorneys spent 2 weeks trying to untangle before telling her, with the careful faces of people delivering a terminal diagnosis, that the exposure was real. The board, it turned out, had already consulted their own counsel. There was language in the fiduciary breach claim that could implicate her personally if the SEC investigation widened. She settled. She had to. It wiped out most of what she had. She kept the apartment for another 6 weeks, paying rent on credit, telling herself she was thinking, that she was strategizing, that the right move would present itself if she waited long enough. Then the credit ran out too. The apartment in Tribeca went back to the landlord. She moved into a furnished studio in Astoria that smelled like someone else's cooking and had a radiator that knocked 3 times every hour, all night, as though reminding her of something. She was 44 years old. She had no job, a gutted savings account, a reputation that would make any serious financial institution hesitate, and a suit she kept putting on in the morning before remembering she had nowhere to be. She stopped putting on the suit. It was her friend Delia who finally got her out of the apartment. Delia was an oncologist, practical in the way that people who work with dying patients tend to be, and she had no patience for what she called the theatrical phase of grieving. "You need air," Delia said, "and food that isn't crackers." They went to a diner in Astoria called the Blue Ribbon, the kind of place with laminated menus and a pie case by the door and coffee that had probably been sitting since the previous Tuesday. Serena ordered toast and didn't eat it. Delia ordered eggs and ate methodically and watched her. "You look like you're somewhere else," Delia said. I am somewhere else, Serena said. Across the aisle, there was a man in a booth with a little girl. The girl was maybe 5 or 6, small and serious-faced, with her hair in uneven pigtails that looked like they'd been done in a hurry. She was coloring very carefully in a book that had been placed on top of the laminated menu, treating it with the particular concentration of a child who understood that focus was required. The man, her father, Serena assumed, was reading something on his phone with one hand and cutting up the girl's pancakes with the other, without looking, the way you only do something if you've done it 10,000 times. He was ordinary looking. That was her first thought, and she recognized even in the moment that it was not a kind one. He wore a button-down that was clean but had been ironed wrong, the collar slightly off. His jacket was folded on the seat beside him. He looked tired in the specific way that single parents look tired, not sleepy, but carrying something. Dad, the girl said, without looking up from her coloring book, you forgot syrup. I didn't forget, the man said. I was getting to it. You were on your phone. I was checking something for work. You're always checking something for work. He put down the phone. He flagged down the waitress. He got the syrup. The girl accepted it with the gravity of someone whose point had been made sufficiently. Serena looked away. Who's that? She asked Delia, nodding toward the booth. Delia glanced over. No idea. Why? No reason, Serena said, but she kept looking. There was something about the scene she couldn't stop watching. Not the man, exactly, but the texture of it, the coloring book, the wrong ironed collar, the automatic hand cutting the pancakes while the mind was somewhere else, the way he had put down the phone when the girl said what she said. Just put it down. No argument, no in a minute, no performance of prioritizing. He just put it down. She had managed people for 14 years. She had interviewed hundreds of them. She had a specific instinct, developed over a long time, for the difference between people who performed capability and people who actually possessed it. She couldn't have said exactly why. Sitting in a diner in Astoria eating toast she didn't want, she was looking at a man in a wrong ironed shirt and thinking, that one. His name was Patrick Corrigan, and she didn't learn it that day. She learned it 3 weeks later when she was sitting in a WeWork on 34th Street with a legal pad and a laptop and the remnants of a plan she was trying to reconstruct from memory and stubbornness. She had decided, in the way you decide things when the alternative is giving up entirely, that she was going to consult. Independent financial advisory work, clients she could approach through back channels, the kind of engagements that didn't require a clean public reputation, just results. The problem was the model. She had built models her entire career. Complex, layered, stress-tested. But this one, a risk assessment framework for a small private equity client who had taken her call out of pity or curiosity or old loyalty, she wasn't sure which, kept producing outputs that felt wrong in a way she couldn't locate. The formula was right. The data was sourced correctly. But something in the architecture was off. She stared at it for 4 hours. Then someone sat down across from her. You've been looking at that same screen since I got here, the someone said. 3 hours ago. She looked up. It was the man from the diner. He looked different in this context. Or maybe the same, she thought, and she was just seeing him differently. He had a laptop of his own and a coffee from the cart downstairs. He was wearing the button-down again, or one exactly like it. I'm sorry, she said. I'm not criticizing, he said. I do it too. I was just noticing. He paused. I'm Patrick. I work here most mornings, Serena, she said. She went back to her screen. He went to his. An hour later, she made a sound she hadn't intended to make, a small exhaled sound of frustration, when the model produced the same wrong output for the 8th time. What's the problem? Patrick said. It's nothing. Okay. Another 20 minutes passed. It's a correlation matrix, she said. I have a 3-variable risk model and the outputs are inconsistent with the underlying data. I've checked the formulas 4 times. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Can I look at it? She turned the laptop toward him. He looked at the screen for about 90 seconds without speaking. Then he said, Your weighting function is asymmetric. You've applied a different decay rate to the 3rd variable than to the first 2, but you're treating them as equivalent in the correlation step. The inconsistency compounds across the iteration. She looked at the screen. She looked at him. "What do you do?" she asked. "I'm a risk analyst," he said. "Freelance, mostly. Some contract work." She would find out later, much later, that freelance, mostly, was the modest version of a career that had included 7 years at BlackRock, 2 years building quantitative models for a sovereign wealth fund in Singapore, and a published paper in the Journal of Financial Economics that her colleagues at Halcyon had cited in internal memos without knowing who wrote it. He had left institutional finance when his daughter was born and his wife left. He had wanted to be home for school drop-off. He had decided that was non-negotiable, and he had built a life around it, smaller than the one he'd walked away from, but his. She didn't know any of that yet. What she knew was that he had found her problem in 90 seconds. "Thank you," she said. "Sure," he said. He went back to his own work. They developed the kind of acquaintance that forms in shared spaces between people who are both there, often, and both focused. Occasional nods. The comfortable silence of two people who don't need to perform being friendly. Once, he brought 2 coffees from the cart and set one on her side of the table without saying anything. Once, she printed something at the shared printer and picked up his document by mistake and saw enough to recognize that whatever he was working on was sophisticated in a way that didn't match freelance, mostly. She started to form a thought that she kept pushing back down. It wasn't time. She wasn't in a position to be forming thoughts like that. Then the call came from Aldrich Partners. Aldrich was a mid-size private equity firm, the kind that had made its money in the 2000s and was now struggling to figure out what to do in a market that had passed them. She knew the managing partner, Ray Aldrich, from 2 deal closings in her halcyon years. He had called her the week before, cautiously, and she had answered with the false confidence she had been practicing. They had talked. He had said, "Maybe, let me think about it." He called back. He said, "We want to bring you in as an interim strategic advisor. 6-month contract. If it works, we talk about something permanent." She said yes before he finished the sentence. She went back to the WeWork. She sat down across from Patrick. She told him. He looked up from his screen. "That's great," he said. And he meant it. She could tell by the way he said it, not the performance of meaning it, but the thing itself. "I have a problem," she said. "Okay, I need someone who can build the quantitative infrastructure for a portfolio risk reassessment. It's a 3-month project, maybe 4. The work is real. The pay is below what you'd get institutionally, but it's not insulting. And I know you don't know me, and I don't have much standing right now to be asking this kind of favor, but I've watched you work, and you're the best analyst I've seen at close range in 10 years, and I need someone I can trust the models with." He was quiet for what felt like a long time. "My daughter gets out of school at 3, he said. "I don't take calls after 5. If something breaks on a weekend, I'll handle it Monday, unless it's genuinely critical." "Those aren't negotiable." "That's fine," she said. "Then yes," he said. He was better than she had expected, and she had expected a great deal. The portfolio risk reassessment took 9 weeks instead of 12. His models were clean and transparent. No black boxes, no obfuscating complexity, everything documented so that a competent analyst who'd never seen them could pick them up and run them. He had a way of working that she had almost forgotten existed. In an industry full of people who performed sophistication, he just solved problems, directly, without theatrics. He also, at week 3, sent her a memo. It was 4 pages long, and it outlined 3 structural issues in Aldrich's current portfolio allocation that had nothing to do with what she had hired him to find. He had found them anyway. He noted them clearly, without flourish, with the supporting data attached. She walked into Ray Aldrich's office with the memo the next day. Ray read it twice. Then he looked up and said, "My analyst," she said. "Get him in here," Ray said. Patrick came in. He sat down. He answered Ray's questions with the same directness he brought to everything. No preamble, no positioning, just answers. Ray asked him what he wanted. Patrick said he wanted to finish the project he'd been hired for and then reassess. Ray said he'd like to reassess sooner than that. It was the beginning of something. The Aldrich engagement ran over into a 2nd contract and then a 3rd. By month 8, Serena was running a 6-person advisory team, and Patrick was her head of quantitative risk. She was also, somewhere in there, becoming a different kind of person than she'd been. She couldn't have named exactly when it happened, or whether it was one thing or an accumulation. She remembered a moment in November. They were both still in the office at 7, working through a stress test scenario on the Aldrich flagship fund, and his phone buzzed, and he picked it up, and his whole face changed, went soft and alert at the same time, and he said, "Give me 2 minutes," to no one in particular, and stepped into the hallway. She could hear him through the glass. Just his voice, not words. And then his daughter's voice. She could tell it was his daughter by the way his voice changed when he heard it. He was laughing at something the girl had said, and then he said, I know, I'll be home by 8, I promise." "Have you had dinner?" "No, peanut butter isn't dinner, Clem." "I know you like it." "Yes, I know." Okay, I'll be there by 8. I love you." He was smiling when he came back in. He didn't explain. He just sat down and went back to work. She thought about the diner, the pigtails, the syrup, the way he'd just put down the phone. She thought about 14 years of her own life. The deals, the meetings, the quarterly reviews, the bottle of Chateau Petrus above the refrigerator that she'd never had a reason to open. She had built something significant. She had also missed something she couldn't fully name, the outlines of which she was only beginning to see. The thing she had not told Patrick, the thing she had not told anyone outside her legal team, was that the SEC investigation had not fully closed. There was a secondary inquiry, narrow and specific, relating to her personal sign-off on a document in the Caldwell deal. The document was technically accurate, but had been presented in a way that, her attorneys said, could be characterized as selectively incomplete. She had signed it under pressure, at midnight, before a board that had already made up its mind. She had known, even as she signed it, that she was in a gray area. She had told herself it was fine. It was not fine. In February, 18 months after the Halcyon board vote, the SEC issued a Wells notice. Her attorneys put together a response. There were depositions, there were more documents, there were months of slow institutional process that felt like drowning in very still water. She kept working. She told no one at Aldrich. She told Delia, who responded with the same practical ferocity she applied to everything, "What do you need? Tell me what you need." She didn't know what she needed. The morning the final settlement was announced, a civil penalty, no criminal charges, a bar from serving as an officer or director of a public company for 3 years. She sat in her attorney's office and felt something she hadn't expected: relief. The number was significant. She would have to restructure her finances again. She was barred from the title she had spent 14 years working toward. But it was over. The specific weight of not knowing was over. She drove to the office. She sat in the parking garage for 11 minutes. Then she went upstairs. Patrick was already there. He looked up when she walked in, and something in her face must have told him something, because he didn't say good morning. He just said, "You okay?" She sat down. She told him. All of it. The Wells notice, the depositions, the settlement, the bar. She had not planned to. She hadn't known she was going to until she started. When she was finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The Caldwell document," he said. "The one you signed?" "Yes. You told them it was wrong, before the deal closed. In writing, twice." He looked at her. Not with pity, she would have been unable to stand pity. With something more like recognition. "Okay," he said. "That's all? What else is there to say? You made a mistake under pressure after the decision was already made for you. You're paying for it. It's done." A pause. "What do you need to do next?" She almost laughed. "I have to restructure my advisory agreement with Aldrich," she said. "The bar doesn't affect private advisory work, but I need to disclose, and I need to tell Ray today." "I'll come with you," he said. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said. Ray Aldrich received the disclosure with the expression of a man who had been in business long enough to have seen many things and had learned to take them in without showing how he was taking them in. When she was finished, he looked at her for a while. "Does this change what you've built here?" he asked. "Not legally," she said. "My advisory capacity isn't affected. But I understand if it changes how you see the relationship." Ray looked at Patrick. Patrick looked back. "The work speaks," Ray said finally. I've been in this business 40 years, the work speaks. He picked up his pen. Keep going. She walked out of Ray's office and stood in the hallway and breathed. Patrick was beside her. He said, keep going, he said. He did, she said. She looked at him. He was watching her with that steady way he had, the way that had taken her a long time to understand, was not patience exactly, but something more active. He was paying attention. He had always been paying attention. I owe you an apology, she said. He tilted his head slightly. When I hired you, she said, I thought I was doing you a favor, offering you a project below your capacity because I needed the help and you were convenient. I told myself it was a transaction. It was a transaction, he said. No, she said. I was condescending about it and I didn't see that until some time ago. I saw you in a diner and I thought you looked like someone capable and ordinary, and I put those two things together in a way that wasn't fair to either. He was quiet for a moment. I grew up in Dearborn, he said. My dad drove a delivery truck. My mom worked the front desk at a dentist's office. I put myself through Ohio State and then scraped together enough to get to business school because I knew I could do the work. I've had people look at me the way you looked at me the first day you walked in here, like they were doing me a favor by noticing me. I've learned that's mostly about them. She absorbed this. I know, she said. I know it's mostly about me, and I've watched you over the past 8 months, he said, and the thing I see now is different from whatever that was. So, she said. So we're good, he said. He went back to his desk. She stood in the hallway another moment, then followed him. Clementine Corrigan was 6 years old, with uneven pigtails that were always slightly better than they'd been in the diner, but still gave the impression of having been done in a hurry. And she had her father's way of paying attention. She called Serena Hargrove for 3 months without being asked to, because Patrick had told her that Serena was important, and that was how you spoke to important people. On the 4th month, she called her Serena and looked at her sideways to see if this was okay. Serena said it was fine. She started joining them for dinner once or twice a month at a Thai place near Patrick's apartment in Sunnyside that Clementine had declared was the only good restaurant. She watched Patrick help Clementine with second-grade math in the way he did everything, not doing it for her, just sitting beside her while she worked, asking questions that led her to find the answer herself. She watched Clementine watch her father when she thought he wasn't looking, with the particular expression of children who understand that they are loved in a very complete way and have decided, in their bones, that the world is probably going to be okay. She thought about what she had built and what she had not built, and what there might still be time to build. The 3-year bar ended on a cold morning in January. Her attorney called to confirm. She was sitting at the kitchen table in the apartment she'd moved into 18 months earlier. A real apartment now, not a furnished studio, with a window that faced east and got the morning sun. She called Ray Aldrich. She called Delia. Then she sat there with her coffee and thought about what she actually wanted. This was, it turned out, a harder question than she'd expected. She had spent enough time now in the work she was doing, the advisory work, the building of something smaller and more deliberate, that she wasn't sure she wanted to go back to the version of herself that had needed a corner office and a title and a vote of the board to feel like she existed. She wasn't sure that person had been right, or even happy. She thought about a thing Clementine had asked her once. They were walking to the Thai place. It was an October evening, and Clementine was kicking through the fallen leaves with the focused pleasure of a child who has recently learned that fallen leaves are for kicking. And Clementine had looked up at her and said, "What's your job?" Serena had thought about how to answer. "I help companies figure out what they're doing wrong," she said. Clementine considered this. And then what? And then hopefully they do it better. What if they don't listen? Sometimes they don't. That must be frustrating, Clementine said, with 6-year-old gravity. It used to be, Serena said. Now I mostly just move on to the people who will. Patrick brought coffee to her desk on a Thursday morning in February, which was not unusual, but then he sat down across from her and looked at her in a way that was slightly more direct than his usual, which was already fairly direct. "I have a question," he said. All right, she said. I've been thinking about building something, he said. Not a boutique firm exactly. Something more specific. A risk advisory practice focused on mid-market companies that are underserved by the big institutional players. There's a real gap. The work would be meaningful. The client base would be companies that actually listen, because they have to. They don't have the cushion to ignore good advice. She had thought about this too. She had thought about it for about 6 months. I know, she said. I need a partner, he said. A real one. Not a client relationship, not an employer-employee thing. Someone who brings the client network and the strategic credibility, and who is also willing to do actual work. I know what a partnership is, she said. I know you do. He looked at her steadily. I'm asking if you want one. She thought about 14 years at Halcyon, the bottle of Petrus above the refrigerator, the vote that had lasted 7 minutes, the parking garage, and the 11 minutes of sitting in the dark. She thought about a man in a wrong ironed shirt who had found her problem in 90 seconds and then gone back to his own work, and what it had taken her to understand what she'd been looking at. Yes, she said. He nodded once. Matter of fact. Clementine wants to know if you'll come to her school play on Friday, he added. She's playing a tree. She says it's a very significant tree. Serena laughed. A real one, the kind that surprised her? Tell her I'll be there, she said. The morning light was coming through the east-facing window of the office, falling across the desk between them, and she thought, this is what there still was time to build. Not a title, not a board's approval. Something you make alongside people who see you clearly and show up anyway, in wrong ironed shirts, with coffee they bring without asking, and daughters who become significant trees. She opened her laptop. He opened his. They got to work.